With the fate of humanity still looming over the horizon, Gabriel and Michael stop at a Waffle House for coffee, hash browns, and what appears to be a little reminiscing. But Michael's version of reminiscing involves Lucifer, themed roll cards, and a family dinner where the victim keeps undermining the plot. Which is to say, the corpse was uncooperative. This is Chapter 17 of The Trouble with Angels. The trouble with God, according to Lucifer, the corpse was uncooperative. If you want to keep binge reading Bob and Hannah's adventure right now, start at Chapter 1, The Trouble with Angels, link in show notes, or go to glorythink.substack.com, and then click on the Trouble with Angels tab. And you can also go to the Season 1 hub, which is also linked in the show notes. And if you know someone who loves Waffle House theology, celestial siblings with old grief, murder mystery dinners in heaven, Lucifer as an overcommitted party host, and the idea that even God might be a deeply mischievous corpse, share this episode with them. Previously, on The Trouble with Angels, Bob and Hannah race into Pierre's hidden world beneath Paris, where whispers, residue, and rat intelligence begin to reveal a terrifying possibility. Something is deeply wrong. What first looked like grief and confusion now bears the unmistakable shape of a conspiracy. And when the truth points toward Gabriel and Michael already being in motion, Bob realizes they may be running out of time to stop a lie from becoming the apocalypse. Chapter 17. The Trouble with God, according to Lucifer. The corpse was uncooperative. By Glory Fink. Gabriel had forgotten how loud humans were when they were tired. Not loud in the catastrophic sense. Not loud like battle or collapse or revelation. Loud in the smaller, stranger way of mortal creatures trying to outwit exhaustion with sugar, caffeine, and the stubborn conviction that whatever had happened to them up to this point in the evening could still be redeemed by hash browns and a conversation that should have ended in the parking lot, but it somehow made it all the way to a booth under fluorescent light. Michael seemed completely at ease in the middle of it. That, more than the place itself, was what unnerved Gabriel. The Waffle House sat off the road like an afterthought the universe had accidentally made permanent. Its yellow sign buzzed faintly against the dark. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, hot grease, syrup, onions, and a kind of exhausted civic tenderness no angel had ever successfully replicated by committee. Every surface shone with that peculiar human compromise between cleanliness and overuse. The booths were cracked in places. The laminated menus had the texture of something handled by generations of people who had come there hungry, grieving, drunk, hopeful, or all four. Michael walked in like a man returning to neutral ground. Gabriel followed him with the wary expression of someone entering a shrine devoted to an unfamiliar god. A little brass bell clinked over the door. A woman behind the counter with a high ponytail, a coffee pot, and the expression of somebody who had already survived 3 smaller apocalypses that night, looked up, took one glance at Michael, and pointed with the pot toward an empty booth. "Sit wherever, sugar." Michael smiled at her with easy gratitude. "Bless you." Great Gabriel slid into the booth across from him and looked at the menu as though it might test them on local dialect. A server appeared almost immediately. She had the contained force of a field general and the exhausted kindness of a woman who had seen people at their worst and chosen not to hold it against them until they made her repeat herself 3 times. "What can I get for y'all to drink?" Coffee," Michael said, without even glancing at the menu. "Black, and a water." The server nodded and looked to Gabriel. Gabriel looked back at her. There was a pause. Michael did not rescue them. Gabriel lifted the menu a little higher and said with careful dignity, "I would also like a coffee." The server waited. Gabriel frowned down at the menu as if the answer might be hiding in the breakfast meats. "And," they added, "a water to accompany it." The server's mouth twitched. "Cream or sugar?" Gabriel blinked. "For the water?" Michael made a sound that was either a cough or a suppressed laugh. Gabriel kicked him under the table without looking away from the server. "No, honey," the woman said, now openly amused, "for the coffee." "Ah," Gabriel glanced at Michael, who was already smiling into his folded hands like a traitor. "No, I should like to meet it as it is." "That's brave," the server said. She wandered off. Gabriel lowered the menu slowly and narrowed their eyes at Michael. "You did that on purpose." "I did nothing," Michael said. "You ordered coffee." "You withheld context." Michael leaned back in the booth, pleased with himself in an older brother way that would have been intolerable in anyone else. "You've spent millennia delivering messages into dreams and standing over kings. I have complete confidence in your ability to survive beverage clarification." "You are taking an unholy amount of pleasure in this." "Only a modest and appropriate amount." Gabriel flattened their lips and looked around the diner in self-defense. A man in steel-toed boots with a reflective white shirt sat 3 booths down, eating with the determined concentration of someone refueling a machine that happened to have feelings. At the counter, 2 college-aged girls in hoodies were laughing too hard over something on one of their phones, the kind of laughter that came not from fresh amusement, but from the body's desperate insistence that if it did not release pressure, somehow it would surely burst. Near the window, a couple were having what was clearly either the end of a fight or the beginning of a forgiving. Their voices were low, their shoulders tired, their hands on either side of a plate of untouched toast, like they weren't sure yet whether this counted as reconciliation or simply staying long enough for the coffee to cool. Behind the counter, the ponytailed woman poured coffee for a lone trucker while shouting over her shoulder for someone named Tasha to please, for the love of everything holy, stop burning the ham. Michael watched Gabriel watching the room. "There," he said softly. Gabriel did not look back at him. "There what?" "That look." "What look?" "The one where you stop evaluating and start noticing." Gabriel turned their head just enough to fix him with a warning glance. "Do not make me regret being here." Michael only grinned. The drinks arrived. The server set them down with the solemnity of a priestess distributing sacrament. "Y'all ready to order, or do you need a minute, hun?" Michael ordered with alarming confidence, as though he had been training for exactly that moment since the dawn of time. "I'll take the all-star. Bacon, wheat toast, hash browns scattered, smothered, covered, and chopped." The server nodded as if that was a complete and respectable sentence. Gabriel waited until she looked at them. "I would like," they said carefully, "the waffle." "Just the waffle?" Gabriel glanced down at the menu again. "And eggs. How do you want them?" Gabriel looked at Michael. Michael did not help. Gabriel inhaled through their nose like a saint encountering bureaucracy. "Prepared?" The server barked a laugh, and Michael folded briefly in half. "Scrambled okay?" Gabriel sat back with all the dignity of a deposed monarch. "Let it be so." When the server left, Michael was still smiling. "You are unfairly cruel to me." "I'm buying," Michael said. "That does not absolve you of your crime." "No," he said, "but it helps." They sat for a while in a kind of familial quiet that requires thousands of years of knowing each other at their worst while their love remained constant. The silence between them was not empty. It had the texture of long familiarity. They'd spent ages angry, estranged, cautious, careful. But silence had always belonged to them in a way it did not belong to others. They knew how to sit in it without demanding performance. At the counter, one of the laughing girls abruptly covered her mouth and started crying without warning. Her friend immediately shifted closer, wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and without making a production of it, pushed her own plate over between them. The crying girl laughed through it and stole a bite of hash browns. Gabriel watched with an expression Michael knew too well. Not judgment, recognition. The couple by the window had progressed from low-voiced disagreement into the delicate, humiliating work of trying to say what they actually meant. The night shift worker in boots had finished his coffee and was now staring into the middle distance as if his soul had briefly left his body and might need careful directions back. The woman behind the counter was flirting cheerfully with the trucker, while also refilling 3 drinks, ringing up a tab, and shouting toward the kitchen, "If those hash browns come out cremated again, y'all are explaining it to Jesus, not me." Michael took a sip of coffee and said almost to himself, "This is basically like a live-action mystery." Gabriel closed their eyes. "Please don't." Michael's smile widened. "Yes." "Michael." "Hmm?" "Do not. It was worse than this." Gabriel stared into their coffee. "I remember it differently." Michael let the pause stretch just enough to become dangerous. Then he said, "God really was trying to play dead." Gabriel made a small sound that meant, "Absolutely not, you traitor," and "I am already remembering," all at once. Michael leaned back in the booth, cup warm at his hand, eyes gone a little distant at the edges. "A very long time ago," he said, "Lucy decided what the family needed was structured fun." Gabriel put a hand over their face. "That was the first sign," they muttered. "It should have been," Michael agreed. And the Waffle House, with all its coffee, steam, and fluorescent hum and mortal persistence, receded just enough to make room for heaven. Lucifer called it the House of 7 Doors, which should have told everyone involved that moderation was not going to be part of the evening. The invitations had arrived on cream paper thick enough to stop a small knife, each sealed in dark wax with a crest none of them recognized, but all of them distrusted on instinct. The wording had been theatrical to the point of threat. "You are summoned to a private supper at the House of 7 Doors. Come prepared for revelation, betrayal, and a tasteful amount of intrigue." Michael had known, before he had even finished reading it, that Lucifer had spent entirely too long choosing the phrase, "tasteful amount of intrigue." Gabriel, reading theirs over his shoulder, had said, "That means there will be candles." "I expect there will be far too many candles," Michael had replied. There were. Lucifer had staged the whole thing in one of the old banquet halls in heaven, one of the warmer ones with high arched windows and a long polished table that made every gathering look either ceremonial or doomed. The room glowed with candlelight, gold cloth, silver place settings, low flowers, and the kind of restraint that only becomes frightening when Lucifer is practicing it on purpose. It was beautiful. It was also obviously a trap. God had not yet arrived, which should have been impossible to interpret as ominous, and yet somehow was. Lucifer stood at the far end of the room, making minute adjustments to place cards with the pinched expression of a host trying to control variables in a universe famous for refusing that sort of arrangement. Michael arrived first because, of course, he did, and immediately clocked the exits, windows, sideboard layout, suspiciously placed goblets, and the fact there was no visible rules packet. Lucifer looked up and spread her hands. "Oh, you're early." "You didn't include instructions." "There will be instructions." "There are already ambiguities." Lucifer closed her eyes briefly, communing with suffering. "Not everything is a pre-trial hearing, Sir Advocate." "Not yet." Gabriel arrived a moment later, stepped into the candlelight, and stopped dead. "Oh," they breathed. Michael followed their gaze. The place settings had themed roll cards. Lucifer smiled with too many teeth. "Yes," she said. "No," Michael replied. "Yes." At Gabriel's place sat a card in elegant script, "The Seer." They picked it up with reverence. At Michael's place, "The Advocate." Michael stared at it with the flat expression of a divine being who resented being understood. One by one, the others arrived, and with each arrival the room became less like an event and more like a family miracle with a strong chance of turning feral. Raphael came in with a small practical satchel over one shoulder and the look of someone who had sensed nonsense from 3 corridors away. He hugged Michael first because Michael looked stiff, then squeezed Gabriel's shoulder on the way to his chair and said, "Whatever this is, try to eat before it becomes symbolic." Azrael arrived quietly enough that the room changed before anyone consciously registered why. He greeted everyone gently, kissed God on the cheek when they finally appeared, and took his seat as keeper of last rites, with a seriousness that suggested Lucifer had perhaps made a mistake. Raphael passed him bread before the meal had even properly started, and Azrael accepted it with the grave gratitude of a man receiving sacrament from a beloved nuisance. Azazel came in late enough to be irritating and stylish enough to make it seem intentional. He peeled off his coat, read his roll card, the consultant, and laughed once sharply. "Ha! Oh, that's insulting." "It's evocative," Lucifer said. "It's typecasting." "It's dramaturgy." "It's lazy." "It's accurate." Azazel smiled despite himself. "Well, at least you know me." "Unfortunately, yes," Lucifer said. Jophiel swept in, looking as though heaven itself had had to recalibrate around her. Her roll card read, "The Mistress of Revels." She looked from the card to the candles to the flowers to Lucifer and said, with deep satisfaction, "At last someone has chosen scale worthy of me." "Someone," Michael murmured, "is a woman of considerable restraint for not saying, 'At last a text that understands me.'" Jophiel put one hand dramatically to her chest. "Michael, I am trying to be humble in front of the flowers." Cassiel arrived in black and silver and quiet disapproval, read The Inquisitor, and nodded once as if the evening had at last remembered one necessary principle. But when God appeared, Cassiel's stern mouth softened almost immediately, and she rose to kiss their hand before sitting down with all the gathered dignity of a woman prepared to be suspiciously recreational. Camille came last among the invited, visibly wary, read The Penitent Protector, and gave the card the complicated look of someone trying to decide whether they had been assigned a role or accused in calligraphy. "It's not personal," Lucifer said. Camille looked up. "That is not reassuring." Sariel entered after them with a small black folio under one arm, saw the room, saw the placement of the decanter, the folded napkins, the wax on the cards, and said before even reaching the table, "That seal has already been lifted once." Lucifer went perfectly still. Michael slowly turned to look at her. Lucifer smiled too quickly. "Everything is under control." "No, it isn't," Raphael said. Then God arrived, too cheerful. That was the first clue. Michael would insist later, though no one gave him credit for it. God appeared in velvet slippers and an expression of delighted anticipation, took in the room, clasped their hands, and said, "Oh, this is beautiful, darling Lucy. You frightened the flowers into behaving." Lucifer inclined her head and looked for one dangerous moment, pleased enough to risk the whole evening on that praise alone. God read the card at the head of the table. "The Patron." "Oh," they said softly, "wonderful." Michael sat down across from Gabriel and murmured, "This is going to be a catastrophe." Gabriel, unable to stop smiling, murmured back, "Indubitably." What followed, Michael would later insist, was the only truly sensible part of the evening. Lucifer did not begin with drama. She began with an explanation. She remained standing at the end of the table, one hand lightly resting on the back of God's chair, like an officiant, a stage manager, and a fond little sister, all at once. "My loves," she said, "before anyone embarrasses themselves, I am going to explain the premise." Azazel leaned back in his chair. "That is encouraging. It suggests you expect confusion." "I do not expect confusion," Lucifer said. "I expect enthusiasm without structure. Which is worse?" Jophiel looked delighted. Lucifer continued, This is a human game, a murder mystery dinner. The purpose is not to kill anyone. God raised a hand. Yet, Lucifer closed her eyes. Thank you, my lord. A perfect demonstration of the behavior I am attempting to prevent. God smiled beatifically and folded their hands. Lucifer pointed at the roll cards. Each of you has been assigned a character within the fictional household of the House of Seven Doors. These roles come with secrets, motives, and in some cases, clues. In the fiction, the patron has gathered the household together because one among them has betrayed the house. At some point this evening, the patron will be murdered. Azrael lifted a hand with grave politeness. Within the fiction? Yes, Lucifer said with visible relief. Within the fiction. Michael said, and what are the governing rules? Lucifer gave him a look of deep spiritual fatigue. You may ask questions, examine clues, accuse one another, and make theories. You may not overturn the table, open sealed packets before instructed, or attempt an actual inquest. Cassiel asked, May we lie? Lucifer brightened. Yes, elegantly, if possible. Gabriel, with all attention now, eyes bright in the candlelight. Raphael asked, Is there food before the murder or only after? Before, during, and after, Lucifer said. That helps, Raphael admitted. Sariel asked, What level of authenticity have you attempted? Lucifer hesitated. Sariel narrowed her eyes. Azazel barked a laugh. Ha ha! Jophiel placed both palms on the table and looked around the room in wonder. I adore this already! Kamiel, still visibly uncertain, asked, What if one's role contains overlap with one's actual reputation? Lucifer smiled at them with dangerous sweetness. Then I trust you will use the ambiguity artistically. Michael said, What constitutes winning? Lucifer turned to him at once. Oh, Michael, there speaks a man who has never played for the joy of the thing. I am capable of joy. You are capable of outcomes. Gabriel made a sound into their wine glass that was suspiciously close to laughter. God, meanwhile, was radiating so much delight it was beginning to contaminate the room. They looked from face to face as if trying not to grin too broadly and failing. May I ask a question? They said. You may, Lucifer said carefully. How dead am I permitted to be? The whole table broke. Even Michael laughed, though he tried to conceal it as a cough, and failed. Lucifer pointed one warning finger at God. Convincingly! You are permitted to be convincingly dead! God nodded solemnly. I will do my best. You will do less than your best, Lucifer said at once. Jophiel was openly glowing now. This is magnificent! Cassiel, despite herself, had gone from disapproval to austere interest. Azrael's eyes were shining with a sort of helpless amusement that made him look briefly much younger than death had any right to look. Azazel picked up his roll card again and read it with renewed amusement. The consultant. Honestly, Lucy, you do know me. Oh, I know all of you, Lucifer said. That is why the seating chart is perfect. How sinister, Michael muttered. Intentional, Lucifer corrected. Very intimate of you, Gabriel said. Rather dangerous of you, Azazel added. So beautiful, Jophiel said. Potentially legally unsound, Michael said. Emotionally reckless, Raphael said. Promising, God said. By the time the first course was served, the room had shifted. The anxiety was still there, of course it was. They were angels. Human play did not come naturally to them. But delight had entered too. Novelty, curiosity, the little bright charge that comes when a family is about to do something ridiculous together, and everyone can already sense it will go badly in exactly the right ways. Gabriel could feel it collecting around the table like warmth. God stood at last, goblet in hand. Conversations softened, not into reverence exactly, but into attention. God smiled around the table, not kingly, not distant, fond, curious, almost conspiratorial. "My beloveds," they said, "before this night ends, truth will have its due. One among this household has betrayed the house. I have called you to my tables so that what is hidden may be named before the final course is served." Michael straightened. Cassiel's eyes sharpened. Azrael lowered his gaze. Gabriel looked as though the room itself had become articulate. Lucifer's expression, for one brief, radiant second, said, "Yes, exactly, that's the tone." God took a sip, paused, looked down into the goblet with theatrical astonishment, then said, "Ah, so that is how it is," and collapsed. And for perhaps 3 perfect seconds, the room held silent and still. And then everything broke at once. Raphael moved first, chair scraping back as he went to the body on pure reflex. Michael stood and snapped, "No one touch anything!" Cassiel rose half out of her chair and pointed immediately across the table. "It was the steward!" Lucifer whipped around. "What?" "Your access, your management of the room, your proximity to the victim." "That is not evidence," Michael barked. "It is structure," Cassiel said coldly. "It's a narrative laziness," Azazel said, delighted now that someone else had been accused first. Jophiel placed one elegant hand against her own chest and said, scandalized, "Can none of you feel what this room requires of you? There has been a death." "It has been 8 seconds," Raphael said, kneeling beside the body. "Also, the poisoning makes no sense." Gabriel stood very slowly, lifted the goblet with both hands like it was a relic from a ruined temple, and said in a hushed tone, "Do not speak so loudly in their presence." Michael stared at them. "Put that down." "The vessel remembers." "It is a cup." "It is a witness." "It is crockery." Azrael had bowed his head, not theatrically, out of habit. That more than anything quieted the room for one beat. Hamael spoke into the hush with the haunted urgency of someone who had mistaken the agenda entirely. "If we are naming betrayals plainly," they said, voice rough, "then yes, there was a time I wish the house had been brought low." Everyone turned. Lucifer blinked. "What?" Michael stared. "We are discussing the apparent poisoning." Kamael looked from face to face, wounded and defensive at once. "I assumed we had begun." Azazel leaned back, folded his arms, and said, "I suspect this was already more revealing than Lucy intended." "All is still salvageable," Lucifer said. Serial had moved only enough to peer at the fallen goblet and said, "That stain was made after their collapse." Nobody answered. Serial frowned harder. "Also, their signet ring is missing." Michael looked down at God's hand. It was. The room changed shape again. Gabriel drew in a breath like someone at the edge of revelation. "Ah." "Don't at me," Michael said. "It has been taken." "Yes, I can see that." "Authority removed from the dead." "Or from a living host who over-designed the scene," Azazel said. Lucifer put a hand over her face. Raphael, still beside the body, said without looking up, "The residue on the lip of the goblet is harmless." Michael turned. "Harmless?" "Unless anyone here has become vulnerable to mild sleep tinctures and pomegranate cordial, yes." Jophiel gasped. "A false death?" Raphael gave her a flat look, a very theatrical nap at worst. Gabriel clutched the goblet closer. "So, the death is symbolic." "It was already symbolic," Michael snapped. "No," Gabriel said with immense patience reserved for people who had disappointed them artistically. "Now it is layered." Cassiel pointed again, this time at Azazel. "The consultant!" Azazel put a hand to his heart. "Oh, now we are being lazy in another direction?" "You had motive," Cassiel said. "Everyone has motive, that's the premise." From the floor, God said with an unmistakable cheer, "That is the premise." Every head turned. Lucifer went white with outrage. "My lord," she hissed, scandalized down to the marrow, "you cannot give clues. You're dead, remember?" God opened one eye. "I'm trying to help." "You are compromising the integrity of this structure." "It lacks momentum." "It has pacing." "It has stagnation." God opened the other eye, looked around at the table like a delighted child refusing bedtime, and added, "Also, some of you are solving with your favorite flaw instead of your best gift, which is very informative." Michael looked between them with the expression of a man watching law itself be insulted in public. "The victim may not participate in this inquiry." "Thank you," Lucifer said. God considered, then far too sweetly, "What if I am not participating precisely? What if I am merely creating conditions under which you may all shine?" "No," Lucifer and Michael said together. Gabriel's eyes, shining, whispered, "I fear the dead are restless." "The dead are definitely meddlesome," Lucifer muttered. God smiled from the floor with increasing mischief. They were no longer merely bored. They were entertained now, and worse, curious. Gabriel would remember later that this was the part where the game stopped belonging to Lucifer entirely and began belonging in some ridiculous and affectionate way to the whole table. Because God was not only cheating, they were egging everyone on. Not cruelly, not to win, but to truly perceive. To see what Lucifer would do when beauty, structure, and control all failed her at once. To see what Michael would do with structure. To see what Gabriel would do with the vibes. To see whether Raphael would protect the living or the game. To see whether Azrael would honor the dead, the truth, or the tenderness between them. To see whether Cassiel would accuse from discipline or sorrow. To see whether Hamael would hide or tell the truth crookedly. To see whether Azazel would sneer and disengage or play anyway. To see whether Jophiel loved beauty enough to commit to nonsense. To see whether Serial could follow accuracy all the way to meaning. And every time the room began to lag, God prodded it with wicked delight. A suspicious cough from the floor, a muttered, "You're all ignoring the evidence." A corpse hand gesture toward the wrong clue, just to see who would follow it. At one point, when Michael was halfway through imposing an order of testimony, and Jophiel had just informed Azazel that suspicion required better posture, God cracked open one eye again and said, almost to himself, "Oh, this is better than I had hoped." Lucifer stared at the ceiling like an angel, silently asking the universe why she had ever tried to organize an evening of family fun. And that, more than the clues, more than the false death, more than the forgery trail Lucifer had so lovingly planted, was when the night turned. Not toward competence, never that. Toward joy, real joy. The kind that sneaks up on a family sideways while they are all too busy being themselves to defend against it. Cassiel, who had begun the evening prepared to uphold a principle and a tone, found herself arguing about motive with a light in her eyes that looked suspiciously like pleasure. Camille, still mortified, was nonetheless no longer entirely miserable, because Raphael had pressed a fresh piece of bread into their hand and murmured, "Eat before you confess to treason again." Azazel, though still deeply offended at being the obvious red herring, had begun playing in earnest just so he could beat Lucifer at her own structure. Jophiel was ecstatic. Serial, who had not intended to enjoy herself at all, was visibly irritated by how much more satisfying it felt to be right in front of an audience. Michael had tried, truly tried, to remain indignant. But indignation is hard to sustain in a room full of people you love when one of them is pretending to be dead badly and another is holding a wine goblet like it has legal standing. Gabriel, meanwhile, was incandescent. That was what Michael remembered most clearly later. Not the actual path of the clues, not the argument over whether the altered household record represented counterfeit authority or merely unauthorized correction. Not even Lucifer's look of betrayed devotion every time God opened one eye from the floor. He remembered the light on Gabriel's face. He remembered Raphael laughing with his head tipped back. He remembered Azrael smiling into his hand like he was embarrassed to be caught being happy. He remembered Cassiel's mouth twitching at some outrageously wrong accusation. He remembered Azazel laughing because Lucifer was suffering. He remembered Jophiel declaring, "At last, a family tragedy with standards." He remembered Sariel saying, deeply offended, "The record itself has not become a body. It remains a document," after Gabriel had solemnly informed the room that the record itself has become a body. And he remembered God standing up too early, brushing dust from their sleeves, and saying, "I thought the forgery clue turned out rather well, actually." Lucifer stared at them in open betrayal. "My lord!" "Yes, darling." "You were meant to remain dead until the final thematic convergence." "It converged." "It has not." "It has begun to." "That is not the same thing."
"It can be interpreted as adjacent."
"It is ruinous."
"It is revived."
And somehow that was what undid the room all over again. Not the clues, not the collapse, not even the cheating, just that. Revived. They all laughed then. Not politely, not gracefully, not in the careful way eternal beings sometimes laugh when they're trying to preserve dignity in front of each other. They laughed hard enough to lose the emotional distance. It was one of the last times they were all happy at the same table. Back in the Waffle House, Michael was smiling into his coffee. Gabriel had gone very still. Not brittle still, just not grief-struck, just held. Around them the diner went on. The crying girl at the counter had recovered enough to steal a hash brown from her friend and declare with tearful dignity that she was still right in principle. The couple by the window had finally touched hands across the table. The night shift worker had paid, stood, and gone back out into the dark to continue whatever thankless labor waited for him. The woman behind the counter refilled drinks like she was extending mercy by the ounce. Their food arrived. Michael's plate looked like a military success. Gabriel stared at their waffle, their scrambled eggs, and the little pitcher of syrup with the solemn caution of someone regarding a ritual object that might yet demand a password. Michael picked up his fork. "It's safe." That is what Lucifer said about the false poisoning. Michael laughed again. Gabriel looked down at the plate and then unexpectedly smiled. Not the polished, angelic social smile they used when they wanted to spare lesser beings discomfort. Not the thin, private smile that meant they were tolerating absurdity. A real one. Soft, startled, almost young. "I forgot," they said quietly. Michael did not pretend not to understand. "What?" "That we used to do things like that." Michael cut into his eggs and took his time chewing, giving the moment a little room to breathe. Then he said just as quietly, "You don't have to forget again." Gabriel looked at him for a long moment. The fluorescent light was unkind to everyone, which was part of why Michael liked it. No one could hide in it. Not glamour, not grief, not love either. Gabriel looked away first, not out of discomfort, but because the room had reclaimed them again. The server was laughing now at something the trucker had said. One of the girls at the counter was drawing shapes and spilled condensation on the tip of a straw. In front of the griddle, the cook shouted, "Order up!" like it was a declaration of faith. Michael buttered his toast. After a while, he said, "We were terrible at mysteries." Gabriel made a soft noise of agreement. "We were," they said. "An offense to the concept of clues." Michael nodded solemnly. "Especially you." Gabriel looked scandalized. "Especially me?" "You named the goblet." It was carrying emotional weight. It was carrying wine. It had become more. It had become sticky. Gabriel laughed into their coffee. Michael let the sound of it settle around them. The Waffle House kept going. Humans kept trying. Not gracefully, not consistently, but with the kind of composure heaven liked to pretend mattered. They tried while hungry, They tried while tired. They tried in the middle of embarrassment, heartbreak, and shifts that ran too long. Conversations that should have ended but didn't, and nights that had gone sideways hours before. They made food, shared it, stayed, apologized badly, laughed too hard, came undone in public, and were gathered back together by caffeine, comfort, or somebody saying honey, like it still meant something altogether more divine. Gabriel watched them with the same softened attention. At last they said, "Humans keep trying." Michael nodded. "So did we." Gabriel was quiet for a beat. Then softer still, they said, "So do we." Michael buttered his toast. "We were still terrible at mysteries." Gabriel glanced over him at the rim. Gabriel glanced at him over the rim of their coffee. "We were an offense to the concept of clues." That goblet never recovered from your interpretation of it. It had become symbolically important. It had become sticky. Gabriel smiled. Then Michael's expression changed. Not much, just enough. Gabriel set their cup down. "What?" Michael was already turning toward the window. Outside, under the buzzing yellow light and the dark stretch of parking lot beyond it, Bob was striding toward the diner with the unmistakable energy of a man who had run out of time 3 minutes ago. Hannah was right behind him. Even through the glass, she looked like trouble had found a second wind. Michael stood. Gabriel followed his gaze and sighed over the last of their coffee. "Oh, no," they said. The bell over the door jingled. Hannah spotted them, pointed like she'd found the only two people in creation capable of ruining her evening correctly, and said, "Good, you're both here. We've got a problem." Next time, on The Trouble with Angels, Bob and Hannah finally catch up to Gabriel and Michael, only to discover Michael has already smelled the lie on the wind and has been buying time the only way he knows how, with love, evidence, and a very improvised road trip. But suspicion is not the same thing as proof, and proof is not the same thing as peace. If they're going to stop the end of humanity, they'll have to do something even harder than solving a forgery. They'll have to get the family to agree on what the truth means. You've been listening to The Trouble with Angels by Glory Fink. If this chapter hits somewhere tender in you, please be gentle with yourself tonight. Eat something nourishing. Drink some water, and remember that surviving awkward mysteries, bad coffee, and grief counts too. If you're in the US or Canada, you can call or text 988 for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. In the United Kingdom and Republic of Ireland, Samaritans are available at 116-123. In Australia, Lifeline is 131114. And if you're in immediate danger, please call your local emergency number. And if you want to help this story keep finding its people, you could tap the heart button. Engagement is magic. Leave us a comment. Michael will treat it like admissible evidence, and Gabriel will assign emotional significance to at least one beverage in your honor. You could also toss a coin in our coffee fund. Divine contributions are always welcome on Ko-fi, Venmo, Cash App, link in the show notes, or you could join our Substack as a paid subscriber. We appreciate all of your contributions. It helps us keep going. The Trouble with Angels can be found at Glorious Magazine, link in show notes. And you can also check us out at Coffee Bunny Crafters Cafe, link in show notes. And you can find me, Glory Fink, as @Glory Writes the Blues on social media. Blue Sky, Instagram, YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, TikTok, and Threads. Stay out of suspicious banquet halls, tip your diner waitstaff, and keep your wits about you when you're around corpses with opinions. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in Chapter 18. Goodbye.